utilizing golf as the canvas to train all of these leadership and life skills that cross over to all the other aspects of life, that every kind of situation that can challenge us and bring adversity in life, we experience it out there on the golf course in some form of it.
Welcome, everybody, into another episode of the Fairways to Fortune podcast. I'm your host, Joe Canfield. Today, I'm super excited for our guest. We have Dr. Gaston Cordova with us today, a NeuroPerformance coach. And I'm excited to talk to you, Dr. Gaston, because this is something that I struggle with myself on the golf course. I'm a mental basket case, as I've admitted several times on this podcast. And so I'm super excited to have you on here. This stuff is super interesting to me personally. And we've been able to chat beforehand. But I want to have you just jump right into your background, give yourself a nice introduction, and kind of say, what qualifies you to be one of the greatest neuroscience coaches in the country?
Well, Joe, first off, thanks for having me on. I'm very excited to share everything that we had talked about before and give your listeners some information to work with out there on the golf course, because as you said, it is certainly a never-ending journey of self-mastery and mental mastery. And that's why golf is the most beautiful sport. It's just, it's never-ending. It's infinite. So beautiful parallel to life. And so, to give a little feedback, a little background about how I've been doing what I've been doing. It's been about 17 years in the performance coaching world for me. I have my doctorate in physical therapy, and it's interesting. A lot of people are curious as to how does that DPT, PT background, how does it interface with sports performance? And the quick story is, in my 20s, when I was in grad school, being from Chicago, I thought I was going into PT, that when I come out, I'd be a sports med guy working for the Bulls or the Bears, or perhaps on the tour, something like that as a PT, right? And so my impression of therapy was like a lot of people's, that it's sports med, it's ortho, it's that kind of patient care. I didn't realize the whole second year and a half was all dedicated to neuroscience, because as a physical therapist, there's many different type of rehabilitations that occur outside of sports med, such as post-stroke, such as pediatrics in terms of CP, any kind of traumatic brain injuries for vets, anything like that. So I became absolutely obsessed with how the brain and body was wired, because that's what a physical therapist is commissioned to do, to rewire the motor pathways, sensory motor pathways, from where there's a disconnect due to injury or any situation like that. And so when I was recruited into the high-level executive sports performance coaching world through Sports Psych, my previous mentor, I started incorporating a lot of my understandings of neuroscience into everything I was learning in sports psychology and mental skills training. And what I started seeing is that there's the same linkages of how our thought patterns and the mental habit loops that we experience are governed under the same and very similar neural pathway processes that we find in therapy, in being able to help a patient rewire the motor program to reach out, pick up a fork and bring it to their mouth. The same kind of wiring, we're able to utilize similar, if not same techniques, to be able to work on, say, the vagus nerve that is the calm center of our entire nervous system and the different pathways. So that's, in a nutshell, how my approach to coaching human performance evolved. That was back in 2010, 2011, almost 12 years ago. And so the exciting thing that's happened in my world over the last 5 to 6 years is that we're seeing so much applied science in the sports psychology world now. There's so many athletes, especially on tour, that talk about breath work, that talk about different ways to manage the mind through some of these techniques, through managing your physiology. So Uh, to quicken up where my history is at, I started coaching in this space in 2007. I created my own coaching brand in 2010. Had some early success, and I just continued to follow the science and started incorporating my theories of human performance, definitely in the golf world, but also baseball and other sports, and even in the executive coaching world as well. So yeah.
That's very cool. That's awesome. The background's incredible. And you work with tour athletes, you work with college athletes, and then you're working with executives as well, right?
Yes, sir. Yes. And
That's
it's
awesome. It's
fascinating.
so interesting to me. And when we first connected, I mean, you see a lot of professional athletes and the way that they train, and a lot of it is so physical, weightlifting. They're in the gym, they have nutritionists, they have all these things that focus on the physical aspects of their body. But
Mhm.
the mental coaching side of things, anybody can do that. It doesn't, you don't have to be a peak physical specimen like most of these professional athletes are. And so when we talked, you were talking a little bit about your background in how you were working with Alzheimer's patients
Oh,
and
yes.
working on those connections within the mind. And everybody has a brain and they're all wired similarly. And so I am curious about, how your experience with professional athletes has translated to just your regular everyday golfer.
Yeah. And that's what I'm excited about, especially this next generation. And then the parents of these, of the youngsters that I coach. So say if I had a bunch of, great athletes just finish their high school championship. And then I had my college seasons just end up and my young pros. So what's fascinating, the link between the everyday golfer and any golfer that's playing at the highest levels is that the same circuitry apply. And so what I'm most passionate about, and this is why I do what I do, is that utilizing golf as the canvas to train all of these leadership and life skills that cross over to all the other aspects of life. That every kind of situation that can challenge us and bring adversity in life, we experience it out there on the golf course in some form of it. And so the whole nuance of golf and how it is open, variant experience every single time, even if you play the same course every single time,
Right. Right.
you are a different person that given moment, that given day, that given round. We are all different every single day. And so when I share with how do these mental skills and neural performance skills translate to the everyday golfer, it is getting deep into self-regulation techniques, emotional regulation techniques. I get into emotional intelligence lessons. I get deep into all those components. But before I go there, I go into the somatic and the physiology regulation components. So I think I was sharing with you on how the very first lesson I do is give a simplified explanation of exactly what this internal nervous system is doing and why it's doing that. Why does the fight, flight, or freeze response exist in our human system? Why does it show up on a par three over water that you tripled last year? Why does it just immediately ping
Right. Even
without
though it's,
conscious thought?
yeah, even though it's that same 150-yard shot you just hit on the last hole, right?
You got it, brother. And and I'm such a science nerd, and how we interface with our environment and all of these data points that come through our eyes, our ears, our senses. There are millions of data points coming in a second. And so, as you said, you just pured 150-yard 9 iron to 10 feet, but now you're on this next hole. It's 150-yard par three over water. It's the same exact shot, but your eyes are perceiving something completely different. So then those elements of the mind that house pain points, hurt, fear, memories, emotions, now that midbrain is starting to activate a bit. And so your body is starting to react to this scenario as if it's being chased by a grizzly bear. And that's how I talk and explain the nervous system response and reactions to your immediate environment. And then when you build on the self-discovery, self-awareness that lead to self-regulation, now you're able to be like, okay, My body is just doing what it's meant to do, to try to protect me. I've got the tools and the process to offset it, get to neutral, go through my routine, put a nice tempoed swing on this to a finished balance, and just see what happens with curiosity. That's a very simple little mental habit loop that I work with a lot of my students. I interface with a lot of the lessons out of Atomic Habits, which is an amazing book that I'm sure perhaps all of your listeners are either read it or know about it, but it's very real. I love that book because it talks about the neuroscience of how do these little thought loops just come up when we could see it clearly, discover what's happening in our own mind. Now explore all of these potential processes to offset these variables. Now we could go forward with curiosity and less fear, less anger, less agitation, and just grow our heart, grow our character. And that's what I'm doing for the youngsters, that we're using golf as the boot camp to build our character, build our heart, build our internal skills that'll go beyond the fairways and greens and the tournaments.
I love that, because golf is really a spot where you develop who you are as a person, I think. And I love taking people on the golf course when I first meet them, because it tells me more about that person than I'm going to learn in any other setting. And I recognize this in myself really early on in my career. Like, I've played the game since I was 7 years old, and I've snapped a few clubs over my leg, and like I've chucked clubs, and I was pretty angry teenager, and like pretty, had those emotions, and would show that out in the golf course. And so when I, kind of grew older and matured a little bit, I could recognize that myself on the golf course and say, okay, what do I need to do? Because I know that this is probably showing up in other parts of my life as well, where it shouldn't be. And so I would love to hear maybe a story or an example that you have of seeing something like that, maybe with an executive or youth, whoever it may be, about, a certain tendency that they had on the golf course that you kind of helped them overcome, that then translated into their personal or business life.
Yes, sir. Yes. And I love this topic because this is at the core of my mission and my intention of what I do, is that we will discover pieces of you through golf. We just will, especially when we start playing competitive golf, and even for the everyday golfer. It's competitive when you're out there in your morning foursome.
Right. It is. Yeah, for sure.
So all of those little internal memory files that are hanging out in this system, a competitive moment that happened when you were 9 years old, it's hanging out there and it's tethered. It's very fascinating how this internal system is hung onto millions of little memory files that you haven't thought of in 20 years. Great example. I was working with a D1 golfer, and we got into the weeds. And that's the thing, like the process, it just organically starts finding these puzzle pieces that are hanging out down below. That's what I love to do, is just really foster a type of a curious exploration that then, boom, these little puzzle pieces just surface. And so for this one player, there was this inability to close out rounds where, say, he would be 3-4 under going into the final 12, going into 12, going into the final 6 holes to try to close out a round or try to close out a tournament. And so the pattern that he realized is that he would then unintentionally just shift into protection mode. And I don't want to drop any F-bombs on your show, but the way he described it to me, I'm like, I want to hear exactly what you hear in your head. And he's said, I am effing holding on for dear life. That's what it feels like. It's like, just effing hold on. Let's bring this in. And in that shift, his ideal performance state got him to 4 under through 12 holes. And then the environment of his self-identity of, in his mind, being, again, more swears, us golfers love these profanities, being a guy who poops the
bed. Let it fly, doctor. That's fine. On my show, that's fine.
Yeah. So being that guy who just loses it at the end or poops the bed in the last few holes was the type of identity that his mind has created a belief system to. So we went all the way back and realized that, wow, when he was 9 years old, he was on the mound as a pitcher, baseball. It wasn't even golf. And he could remember that it was the biggest game in championship. He was 9 years old and he gave up that run and it was just pain. And then he remembered and he went, and even in the conversation, he was telling me about, gosh, I'll never forget that night with my dad. And I just remember, and he was starting to just re-feel all the pain about when the belief system started about not being a guy who could close out a performance. So it's an interesting scenario there. So that when we kind of just got into, okay, what are the habit loops of what happens in the final few holes? What are the thought sequences that occur? What are the little personal statements and internal narrative that just happen? It just happened. We know what this feels. It's just like, oh my goodness. So a lot of it is just I always hit home discovery and awareness. Some people don't even just pause to train the awareness of, whoa, that internal narrative is starting up again. Boom, we created a new habit loop to override it and neutralize it. And so then I go on and say, hey, go around. Can you take a look at your room? Do you have any water bottles that are just laying around your room that aren't fully drank? And there's like maybe an inch or two of water at the bottom of the water bottle. He's like, how did you know that? I said, it's because your internal belief system has bought into a type of guy who starts off strong but doesn't finish at the end. That's all that's happened. It's not good. It's not bad. There's no judgment here. I'm big on just accuracy. Let's just get to the bottom of what belief systems you unintentionally and organically created from the time you were born, and actually sometimes even before you were born, to where you are at this point in life. I was working with this 74-year-old club champion and helping him just understand, like, oh my goodness, all these years, I didn't know that date when I was 15 years old in high school, that the moment of that literally infiltrated my whole life till now. Very successful person, very successful businessman, very wealthy, club champion. However, with the typical type of challenges of anxiety, worry, sleepless nights, things like that, overthinking, just that's what happens through this human experience. So then when you just literally help somebody understand, hey, let's just get some data on the table and let's just look at the cause and effect linkages and let's come up with plausible processes that can potentially offset and neutralize, and let's build from there. That's how I speak, right? I'm big on being accurate, not over-promising, under-delivering, just saying, hey, we don't know if this is going to work for you. We have to apply, we have to examine a few things, we have to explore what certain things can potentially help you. We have to then run it. We need enough run time to get enough data to say, yes, this helped. This didn't help. This didn't do anything at all. And then from there, that's how we just compile this personal, what I call the consistency formula. The consistency formula of mind, body, heart. How can we consistently show up every day, every week, every month in a certain standard? How can we consistently bring ourselves back to our standard when we inevitably dip out of our standard? There's no perfection. We are going to dip. That's life, such as the universe, such as golf. It's up and down, up and down. So when we're on this downward little shift, have you bought into this internal belief that that's unacceptable? How dare you? You got to get back to the top. You got to be number one. That probably came through when you were about 6 to 12 years old, somewhere in there. So
really? Okay. Well, so the childhood trauma thing is real, is what you're saying.
Is very real.
It shows up in your golf game. So we got to go back and figure that out.
Yeah. And I just love being able to help people understand that it's safe to go there, and it doesn't devalue all the strength and extraordinary things that you've accomplished to this moment. It's just, hey, that's just what happens as humans. That's what happens as like the circuitry of the brain. That's why I just keep it very simple. This brain has just collected a bunch of stuff that caused pain, hurt, and suffering. And it started downloading a bunch of this stuff from 0 to 9. And the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that governs logic, reasoning, impulse control, emotional management, those microchips aren't installed until you're 25.
Right.
So when you have a fearful moment of not closing out a baseball game, you don't have the circuitry to analyze, oh, this is what happened. This was what happened. Oh, this is why dad is coming down on me. All the child thinks is, oh my goodness, am I losing dad's love? Oh my goodness, I can't do this. I can't fail again. That's what's happening in these young minds. And we
Hmm.
all were in a phase of life from 0 to 9, 0 to 12. We all went through brain development. Nobody just came out of the womb and had a fully developed prefrontal cortex, I don't think.
Right. Right. No,
So,
I don't think so. That's what, I have my coach, he's out in South Carolina, and I was out there this summer, and he has a 16-year-old son, right?
mm,
And he kept doing things, and, it was driving his mom nuts, and he kept going back to his wife and saying, hey, honey, prefrontal cortex, it's not there yet. Prefrontal cortex is not there yet.
there
And
you
he's been coaching golf for 30 years, and so like I'm sure that he has a lot of that training, and he's working with college players, so a lot of players that are kind of coming into that age that you just described, that 24, 25 years old, and they're starting to get all of those types of tools, I guess is what you call them, to do that. So it was really funny to see that perspective, and now hearing you talk about it, bringing it back, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it now. I know why my 7-year-old does some of the things he does, right? Like,
you got it. And Joe, I'm so glad you brought that up, because the other interesting kicker that I bring into the awareness of anybody at any age, say the 74-year-old I was speaking about, is when you understand how the brain circuitry works in its protective mechanisms, anything in the moment can spring anybody back to the
hmm,
type of responses from when they were first hurt. So that's why you hear a lot about the childhood wound type of scenarios. I bring up teenage wound, young adult wounds. It's just whenever your system got jostled with something that just was not uh, full of content, peace, just balanced type of emotions. Whenever there was this stress response, there was little pieces in the mind that hang on to it. And so, yeah, somebody could be 50 in their dominating in their corporation, but there could just be one little type of real life scenario, either on the golf course, either in, say, in their marriage or in their business relationships, that one little look, one little theme will spring them back to when they blew that, they four putted on the 18th hole to lose that junior
right,
championship.
right.
Fascinating. And it's just like
Super fascinating. Yeah.
quantum speeds. So the key
Right.
is to train yourself to say, oh, those are the things that I'm still healing from.
Right.
I just
That's
heal.
super interesting.
Yeah.
So, Doc, one of the things, and one of the reasons why I love sports psychology, so I played high school baseball, and I grew up out here in Utah, and we had the sports psychologist from the Utah Jazz come out one time.
Awesome.
And I mean, this was, geez, I'm getting old, but this was probably 17, 18 years ago. And so obviously the science and things have evolved since then, but they put us through a lot of visualization exercises, right? It
Yes,
was
sir.
put your head down, take deep breaths, a little bit of breath work to get going, and then it was visualize yourself at the plate. What are you doing? What are you feeling? What are you seeing? And recently, and we spoke about this a little bit, was Dr. Izzy Justice, right? He did
Got it.
all
Yes, sir.
these brain scans, right? And the thing that stood out to me the most about what that was going through was the visualization piece of things. Like, if I can sit here in my office, close my eyes, and just think about making a 10-foot putt, how much more confident am I going to be in myself when I do get into that actual situation? And I'm curious your take on that kind of type of work mentally, and how much that can help you in life, career, and obviously golf.
Joe, I love that you brought this up, because this is my absolute favorite lesson that I teach is visualization. However, when I teach the depths of how to visualize to get the impactful results, And when you understand that, especially as a youngster or anybody, it's like, oh my goodness, I've tried visualizing many times. It just never worked. And I love to put on my presentation on a Zoom and show them. I said, listen, this is what happens to your brain when your thinking brain is going. But when you are able to train your brain to come down from what's called a high beta state or even a beta state of thinking, and then you can get into breath work and other techniques to bring your brain down to the alpha brainwave state. And then if you could get down to theta, the reason why I'm bringing up these fancier terms is that I get these aha moments when people are like, oh my goodness, I tried visualization, but now that I'm seeing and hearing what you're telling me, I was doing it from a beta brainwave state. So I wasn't able to utilize the expansive impact of what true visualization is. So I'm going to try to quicken up this. My favorite lesson is that you touched upon some of the things that'll slow the brain waves down. Breath. I have these techniques where we're definitely using eye mask so that you can really shut off any kind of brain activity, because you want that brain to hang out in alpha. Because when that brain is slowed down, it shuts down the logical reasoning part of the brain that says, this is just a figment of my imagination. Joe is just pretending to putt. He's not really putting. If those parts of the brain are still switched on, your whole system will not be able to take the suggestibility of making the putt. There's these little slivers that you can't even feel that are resisting the subconscious's suggestibility of hitting 10-foot putts every night, or hitting your drive off the tee, or a tennis player hitting their serve. So when I do visualization training, I get into, hey, first we must master the ability to bring our brain waves down into an alpha brainwave state. Once you're in the alpha brainwave state, here are the sequences of things to then get you into this space where you are, like say my baseball players, you're taking ABs at the academy, or in front of big competitive moment, and you're slowing down the baseball. You're utilizing all this creative flow from this amazing brain state. So to answer your question, visualization is perhaps the most powerful gift we're given. That's a very bold statement. But the reason why people haven't, if they've tried it and dabbled in it, is because they were more than likely, and I can almost boldly say that they were doing it from a beta brainwave state, and they weren't doing it in the suggestible self-hypnosis state of alpha and theta. And so visualization is ultra powerful. And so the visualization training away from the course is imperative. Michael Phelps visualized every morning, every night without fail. It's in the book Essentialism by Brad McKeown. Amazing story about Michael Phelps.
Yeah.
It's real, right? And so there's reasons why the first thing in the morning and the last thing before you go to bed is key. I get into that in my visualization lesson and the dream training lessons that I do. And so to answer your question, to not be too verbose on this, you can see how passionate I am, because it is the thing that will change your belief system. I just had this with one of my golfers. I said, think about it like this. The subconscious is just in there trying to match reality with your beliefs. The very challenging thing in golf is for you to believe that you are a golfer, that you break par. You are waiting for the real life evidence to prove to you that you are a under par player. And because you're sitting there waiting, idling to have the real life results prove to you that you're an under par golfer, that's why your current belief system is that you're a guy who shoots 72, 76 to 76, right in there. And so when you are 6 under at the turn, your true internal belief system is a guy who shoots 72, 73, 74. So guess what happens on the back nine?
Right.
You make a double, you give 2, 3 back, and boom, the scorecard shows 72, 73, 74. So that's why the power of visualization is when you are able to dial your mind way down and really get into the thoughts, feelings, habits, images, and emotions of the guy, the you who eventually shoots under par. You are experiencing that you in the moment, in the suggestibility state. So then your subconscious doesn't know if it's happening for real or if it's happening just in this visualized state. So that's how you start changing that belief system, and you start downloading the feelings of being that guy well before you ever become that guy. And that's
Wow.
why it's so important.
That's awesome. I mean, we could trade stories for hours on that. I'm sure, because that's something that I truly believe in. My wife gives me crap all the time, and I'm like, you should try it. Like, I've been doing it, and like I visualize things outside of golf. Like, I sit in my and I think like, okay, where do I want to be tomorrow? What am I doing tomorrow? And I notice that in my golf game too. When I play casual rounds or I'm out trying to meet somebody, like I'm not like in competitive mode, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm out there goofing around trying to shape shots, hitting shots I know I have no business hitting. But then I'm like, well, maybe if I was playing those rounds and thought, yeah, I can absolutely hit this big old draw around to this, and
Yes.
this is a shot I've hit before. I know I can do it. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to pull it off instead of topping one off the tee, and the guy's looking at me like, you really play in tournaments and teach people how to do this? Like,
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's such a fun conversation, and it's an in-depth lesson because I get even to the into the quantum physics theories of what is happening.
oh wow, yeah,
Yeah, Dr. Joe Dispenza, I feel, is probably one of the best experts in these kind of theoretical realities as to what science is now bringing answers to these very elusive kind of uh, stories in sport or any industry. But when we start really looking at what we're finding in science as to, oh, that's what's happening, and even on a
right,
quantum science type of explanation, I get into like all the science. I'm such a
so
science guy,
fascinating.
right? And it's like, oh, and then I do my best to say, hey, this is what's happening. If you want to know all this stuff, I could tell it to you. Or if you just want me to tell you what to do and you just flat out trust it and do it, however
Yeah,
you learn best, I just want to help you start living your best possible life through golf, through anything outside of golf, and just that's what I'm here to do.
that's awesome. Well, before we wrap up, I want to ask you one more thing,
Yeah.
because this is something I struggle with a little bit, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Zach Williams, who connected us with
Yes, sir.
Drive Force.
Yes,
And
sir.
Zach is a good friend, and what he's doing is incredible. But nutrition is something that is super difficult for me, and I know that your brain uses a lot of calories. There's a lot of energy going on up there, and
Got
certain
it.
things need certain things. I was actually, I was taking my PGA test, and they had a bunch of candy at the tent at the first hole, and I was like, oh man, they have little Laffy Taffies, and I was like, oh, I love these things. And the guy who was working it was like, yeah, your brain needs sugar. You might as well just start there instead of having your body turn it into something else. How much of a factor is nutrition in being able to effectively do all of these things mentally, right? Because it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of time. You got to have mental clarity. And so I'm wondering if you've done any research or have any, knowledge on that side of things that people can use to get them to that spot where the visualization stuff is easier, right?
Joe, I love that you brought this up as well, because this is the other big portion of how my coaching human performance has brought in the reality of brain energetics. Because talk about drive force, that's literally what I'm sipping on. I've become so excited about this formulation because it's what I've been theoretically envisioning what a golfer needs to maintain brain energy for 6 hours. People are like 6 hours. I'm like, yes, six
Yeah,
hours.
it's a lot.
Think about it. And when Zach, incredible guy and brilliant, his formulation, when he started sharing with me and he used the term seeing golfers as a unique endurance athlete, I was like, yes, brother. golfers are not given enough credit to what is actually happening biologically during a performance. There's no halftime. There's nobody subbing in and out for you. There's no bench for you to sit down, right? Typically, maybe you'll sit in your golf cart, but if you're a competitive golfer and you're out there, say a college player or professional, you're on your feet for 5 straight hours. Add on the pre-round warm-up, which is usually 45 minutes, about an hour and 15 on average for most pro golfers or even competitive golfers. You are literally going on whatever fuel you process or put into it, consumed, and then started processing before your round, and then whatever you do during the round. And so one of the most glaring things I see is the mid-round slump or the end of round slump. Why? It's not so much a calorie. It is somewhat of a calorie thing. But what was so fascinating with Zach's product is it's a blood volume thing. And then from there, the part of your brain that is governing impulse control, the prefrontal cortex, and then the other pieces of the brain that govern timing, tempo, gaze stabilization, fine motor processing, all those parts of the brain, they require energy. And so when we start depleting our hydration and nutrition, but say, let's just stay on hydration, the brain doesn't care about hitting a putt if you're sitting there about to wither away in dehydration and self-survival mode. It has its own mechanisms to keep us alive. The self-survival mechanisms are there to keep us alive. So then when we become dehydrated, we start sinking out of the parts of the brain that govern all those high specialized skills for golf. And now we're in this space of not being able to find our rhythm and swing, and aren't able to make great crisp decisions, aren't able to manage our emotions as well. I mean, these teenagers, I share with them, it's like, wow, yeah, you had your emotions very much under control. And say you made a mistake in the first 6 holes and you had all of the brain energy to manage your mistake tolerance. That same exact mistake at the end of the round, you are hangry, like literally the part of your brain that manages your ability to not rage, that's gone bye-bye. If you've not facilitated your internal brain energy to stay at a certain level. And when I do teach about, so I go into all of the routines and habits of all my golfers, and my H&N routine, hydration and nutrition routine. Again, one of my very favorite lessons, because I talk about how about 10 years ago, I was working with the number 2 best amateur in the world. And he went to Stanford as a college player, and then he was working his way up to the PGA Tour. And I brought up the concept of nutritional timing, that there is a certain level of nutrition that must be sustained throughout an entire round so that you don't have a couple Laffy Taffies and 60 to 75 minutes later, you go through a glycemic, or there's the blood glucose, the blood sugar spike, but then the crash. And when that crash happens, the brain takes a complete shift. So it's a matter of consuming certain type of nutrients and certain macros, micros that sustain you so you don't have these spikes and these drops. So then when you're able to maintain this through nutritional timing, you're able to keep a very steady mind, emotional mind, decision-making mind. But then for golfers, all of the fine sensory motor components are able to stay steady. And I was teaching this young Stanford grad. He's like, "Oh my goodness, that's what Tiger was telling us." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Yeah, with Stanford, at least back then, I don't know if Tiger does this still, but he was this golfer of mine was like, yes, Tiger comes to Stanford, invites us and the team for one weekend or one day to just hang out with them, and he just teaches us some cool stuff." He was talking about how this exact thing, that he had everything measured, the timing of it, specific to every single golf round, that his team and him specifically got that sensitive and scientific with his nutritional consumption and timing. I said, there you go. I've never
so interesting
past Tiger, but to hear that anecdotal story, I'm like, yes, It matters
That's so
because of brain energetics.
so interesting. And then for me, it's don't just do that when you have a competitive round coming up. Like you got to get used to it. You need to do these routines. You hear about like marathon runners and endurance athletes all the time that are, yeah, I did a gel during the middle of the marathon and I got the bubble gut and I had to quit. And I was like, well, were you doing that when you were training? Well, no. Well, okay, there's your problem, right? Like you need to put these into your daily routines and things like that. It's so fascinating. Well, I mean, Dr. Gaston, this has been such a fascinating conversation for me. Like I said, this is something that I geek out on. I love the psychology, the neuroscience side of golf. It's something that I put into my coaching quite a bit as when I'm working with athletes. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. So where can people learn more about yourself? And I'm sure we'll reach out. We'll have you on as another guest because we got to get it deeper on some of this stuff. I mean, it's so fascinating and so helpful for so many people, and not just golf, but life as well. But where can people learn more about you? Maybe get in contact, or read some of the things that you've put together.
Yeah. So the easiest way to get to know a little bit more about me is my website, drgaston.com. It's drgaston.com. So that's the simplest way to see my background, see the type of athletes and people I've helped. And the best way to get in contact with me is either through there or the email info@drgaston.com. I get a lot of people just inquiring, setting up a simple 20-minute discovery call to see if this kind of training can help either in their golf game or any part of their game, their kids' lives, things of that nature. I'm all on board to just share as much information I can to just really bring people to that place of where they feel that they're confident that they could go into every day, every week, every month with a lot more clarity and confidence and trust in their life.
Very cool. Well, awesome. Thank you, Gaston, for your time. Again, it was drgaston.com or info@drgaston.com if you want to learn more. Thanks again so much for your time and joining us on the show and sharing some of these just absolutely mind-blowing insights. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the kind words, and thanks for having me on. This was so much fun. I look forward to continuing this conversation soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, thanks.